Hello, ladies and gentlemen, again, this is History 201, Presentation 5, the Middle Colonies and Quaker Culture. So in this last presentation for Quiz 1 material, we're going to talk about the founding of the Middle Colonies, meaning Delaware, New Jersey, Pennsylvania, and New York. And we're also going to look at Quaker culture, which had a pretty profound impact, particularly in Pennsylvania, but also in parts of New Jersey and Delaware as well. Not so much in New York, but we will talk about the founding of New York and how that particular colony in general was different. Okay, so the Middle Colonies, again, Delaware, New Jersey, New York, Pennsylvania. 3 of these colonies were founded first by the Dutch, New York, New Jersey, and Delaware. So their culture is going to be a little different from the beginning, in contrast, say, with the New England colonies or the Southern colonies, which were founded by Englishmen, the Celts, Cavaliers, and also the Puritans in the north. Okay, so New York being the first of these colonies, and then the most important, really, in this kind of New England hub area. Maybe Massachusetts, New York would work together. But New York has a very interesting history because New York was actually settled by the Dutch first, as early as 1613, and it was called New Netherland. Peter Minuit, who lived from 1580 to 1638, was the third director of the New Netherland colony from 1626 to 1632. And Minuit has a bad reputation because he purchased Manhattan from the local Indian tribes for around $1,500 and then renamed it New Amsterdam. And people say, well, he swindled the Indians there. But at the time, the goods that he was trading were actually very valuable things, and the Indians really didn't care about the land a whole lot. I mean, so this wasn't seen as it was seen as a fair trade when the purchase was made. Minuit also established settlements in Delaware, which was called New Sweden in 1633. And the way that the Dutch organized New York was through something called patroonships. So they had these large estates where the individuals, the patroon, basically was a feudal lord. They set the tax laws, they set the legal system, and so they had complete control of these estates. And this enticed people to come here, and these estates were settled along the Hudson River Valley. Now the reason it's called New York is because in the Second Anglo-Dutch War of 1664, the English win. They beat the Dutch, and so they gained through the Peace of Breda New York, New Jersey, and Delaware. And then, of course, New Netherland at that point, well, they changed the name to New York in honor of James, Duke of York, later King James II. Now, New Jersey was part of New Netherland with several large patroonships, but again, it was lost by the Dutch to the English and ceded to England by the Peace of Breda. It was largely an agricultural colony and followed a settlement and governmental pattern similar to that of the southern colonies in its early stages. And even into the 1860s, southern New Jersey was still very much more like the South in many ways than the North. Even New York City thought about seceding and joining the South in 1861 because of their ties to the South. Now, New Jersey actually was 2 colonies for a time, East Jersey and West Jersey, and they were under proprietary control until 1702. And then later they were united together and made into a royal colony in 1702. Delaware was settled by the Dutch in 1631 at Zwannendale, which is present-day Lewis, Delaware. Wilmington, Delaware was settled by the Swedes in 1638. And Delaware was retaken by the Dutch in 1655, but then later ceded again to the English in the Peace of Breda in 1664. In 1682, Delaware was given to William Penn, became known as the lower counties on the Delaware. So essentially it was part of Pennsylvania. Delaware would actually be considered part of Pennsylvania until 1776. Delaware seceded not only from the British in 1776, but also from Pennsylvania. So it gained its independence from 2 entities in 1776. Now, the last group we need to talk about are the Quakers, the Friends, and of course, if you look at religious persecution, that is definitely in line here with the Quakers. And same thing with new societies. The Quakers were setting up places to live that were free from the control of others. And so the Society of Friends, the Quakers, they settled in Pennsylvania, Delaware, New Jersey, and Maryland. They were here to escape religious persecution. In fact, they use this as a badge of honor. They call it the Books of Sufferings. And so if a Quaker was persecuted, killed, whatever, and they were martyred, they were put into the Book of Sufferings. This was an honorable thing to be in. And Pennsylvania was supposed to be a place to show Quakerism at work, free from hampering conditions, as William Penn said. And their conception of God was very important, a God of love and light. Everyone had an inner light, and because of that inner light, they looked at life in a different way. So God was not a vengeful God or a God of fire and brimstone. God was a God of love and light. They believed in very strong communities, basic literacy, equality of manner, simplicity of taste, and importance of family and sexual prudery. Most Quakers came from Germany and northern England. Now, William Penn was the most important Quaker. He lived from 1644 to 1718, was the founder of Pennsylvania, or Penn's Woods, in 1682. He also controlled, again, parts of New Jersey and Delaware. Now, Penn came from a military family of noble blood. In fact, he fought in the Anglo-Dutch War. But then he became a Quaker, converted to Quakerism, which changed his life. And he was given this land as a way to get the Society of Friends out of England. But because of his family, this was highly possible. He also made a lot of money off of Pennsylvania, and a lot of the Quakers did. The initial families became very, very wealthy off of Pennsylvania. He believed in balanced government, English liberties, and religious freedom, which Pennsylvania was well known for. Now, speechways. Quaker speech was known as Midland speech. It was muscular, literal, direct, vivid, forceful, and plain spoken. Many Quaker words have been absorbed into American lexicon. Things like brat, crib, dresser, guts, guzzle, mad, sick, nap, all of these things have found their way into the American lexicon. The Quakers built stone homes, which were very bright. Again, the inner light was very important. Clean, austere, and spacious. Very little display of wealth, and very plain furnishings. They were very plain people. This is a typical Quaker home: 4 rooms and then a room on top for the children. Marriage was a loving agreement. Quakers, though, could not marry non-Quakers. In fact, it was against the law. If you married a non-Quaker, you were banished from the community. Love to them, though, did not mean romantic attraction, sexual passion, or domestic affection. It was a union of sweethearts. Love had to precede marriage. And the inner light was the enemy of the carnal spirit. So copulation was only for propagation. You didn't do that unless you were going to make babies. And in fact, some practiced marital celibacy. Sex was considered sinful. So again, sexual prudery was part of this society. Gender roles, and they had a saying, in souls there is no sex. So there was a tremendous equality between the sexes in theory. Women and men were equal in the church. But women did have to show modesty and restraint, and they had to respect their husbands, though households were less male-dominated than in Puritan Massachusetts or in Cavalier, Virginia. Children here were braced because the will of children was braced because they believed children were harmless, righteous, and innocent creatures. So many households, in fact, were child-centered. And social values are very important for children. They were highly interested in socialization. In fact, children mimicked their parents in just about every way. And so the idea that, again, it takes a community to raise children, the Quakers firmly believed in that. But again, everyone was a Quaker, so they all showed the same values and same morals, same ethics, not like in society today when you have a whole bunch of different people and you don't know who they are. And in Quaker society, teenage years are the most restrictive because that's when your hormones are going crazy and you make a lot of mistakes. So they wanted to ensure that the teenagers were restricted and that they were watched very carefully. And nurtured as well. In terms of religion, they just like the Puritans, they had a meeting. It wasn't an orthodox type of church service. There was no formal structure at all, in fact. Some meetings had no speech at all. These were simple meeting houses for church, very brightly lit, but you could have had singing, praying, speaking, conducted all at once and not in unison. I'm sorry for the typo on that. It should say some meetings had, not meetings shad. Singing, praying, speaking, conducted all at once. When I say singing and praying and singing or music, they really didn't have any structure to the music, so it was very strange services. In terms of food, plain food and drink, they had very simple food ways. Only eat when you're hungry, only drink when you're dry. They boycotted foods that were socially evil. Sugar, because it was grown on plantations of slave labor, and they were abolitionists. And salt, because the taxes were used to pay for wars, and they were pacifists. Dyes were also forbidden, because they were grown on plantations of slave labor. So they had a lot of boiled dumplings and puddings and breads, but really without sugar or salt, so they probably didn't taste very good. In terms of dress, they went plain in the world. Clothing should cover their shame and fence out the world, so the very simplicity of dress, no ornamentation. Again, dyes were forbidden. These are very plain people, very austere people. Most Quakers did not participate in sport. In fact, ball games and blood sports were illegal, and horse racing was opposed. The only thing that you could do for sport was useful and needful recreation, which was physical exercise. So if you wanted to go out and exercise, I mean, that was it. In fact, balls, the actual item of a ball, was, in many cases, illegal to have in your possession. The Quakers, like the Puritans, believed that work was part of worship. They encouraged industry and commerce, and they said that idleness was a deadly sin. So if you weren't working to your ability, if you're just sitting around, you're actually committing a deadly sin. But the Quakers, just like the Puritans, they said you should serve God with your best talents and work as hard as you can in those things as long as you can and do the best that you can. But the Quakers had strong ethics. And so many banks were started by Quakers, and people liked to do business with the Quakers because they believed that the Quakers weren't going to swindle them. Penn also wanted to distribute land equally. When I say that, he made a lot of money because he sold off land to the initial families, and they sold off land in very large chunks. But that sale of that land went into their pockets. And so the earliest families in Pennsylvania made a lot of money, including the Penn family itself. But they also had a benevolent attitude toward the poor. Almshouses, orphanages, things of that nature, a lot of them in Quaker Pennsylvania and other places where you had Quakers, because they had an attitude that poor people should be helped. Order was a condition of social peace, so they believed in and very regimented order. They had sheriffs that were elected, and they firmly believed in elected government. They had judges and peacemakers, but the Quakers believed in rehabilitation rather than punishment. They didn't believe that you should be thrown in prison and throw away the key, excluding laws of sexual deviance. If there was a rapist or something like that, they didn't think any of those people could be rehabilitated, so they would definitely treat them harshly. But otherwise, people were rehabilitated rather than punished. And finally, politics, as I said, were part of religion. So the meetings actually served a political purpose. They believed in political parties and elections. Though the Quakers, because of this self-governance, when you have a people who have strong ethics and moral values, you don't need a whole lot of government. So because of their self-governance, they didn't need a lot, so they believed in minimal government. But they also believed in reciprocal liberty. Every liberty demanded should be returned. So if they demanded freedom of speech, they would return that in kind. If they demanded freedom of religion, they would return that in kind. So they in many ways were libertarians in that way. They also were abolitionists, as I said before. So the Quakers are going to dominate Pennsylvania politics, and you can see this strain of thought, this kind of libertarian strain of thought, in the United States even today. But you can see all of these different strains of thought, whether it's the Puritans in Massachusetts, the Celts, the Cavaliers in the South. You can still see how these cultural dynamics are playing on American politics and into the modern day. So the Quakers are important for the Mid-Atlantic region, Pennsylvania, and then New York would be influenced in so many ways, somewhat by Cavalier culture, but also somewhat by Puritan culture. And so all these dynamics are going to play into American history as we move forward. But again, this is the last presentation for Quiz 1. We'll pick up with Presentation 6 for Quiz 2 next time.